right.
I will now replace this text and start my discussion now about the Blue Nile, Ethiopia, and Egypt. Hold on. Now, there's an old story in history that actually brings us into the present. Today, Abiy Ahmed, the Prime Minister of Ethiopia, recently in receipt of the Nobel Peace Prize, has been discovered in the act of saber rattling. He hasn't pulled it out, but he's saber rattling. And what he's saying is this: if Egypt thinks they can dictate the amount of water that will come to them, if Egypt thinks they have the right to tell Ethiopia not to build the Renaissance Dam, we are prepared to put our entire Ethiopian army on the street. These were the words of Abiy Ahmed. Of course, he rolled back on that quickly. The Egyptians perhaps wouldn't take it seriously. If anybody here is from Egypt, they know the famous phrase in Egypt when a fight is about to break out in Cairo. When a fight's about to happen in Cairo, what you get is something like this. Come, my brother. Let me show you what you get. Grab a hold of my shirt. This is what you get. Siba Hasibak. Siba Hasibak. See, that's what you get. And the fight is, that's it. There ain't gonna be no fight. I let go of him, and he lets go of Siba Hasibak. Khalas? So, what's his name? Sisi? I call him Sisi. No, he's Sisi. He's Sisi. All right, they got rid of a properly elected Muslim government under Muhammad Morsi and took the country backward. So he ain't no general, he's just a sissy. Anyhow, Sisi knows that there ain't gonna be no beef. However, my fear is not a beef between Egypt and Ethiopia. It's a relationship that can develop out of this between Ethiopia and the Zionist state of Israel. What am I talking about? Let's go back. Take the clock back. You see, like today, the clocks went back an hour. Let's go back several centuries. We go back to a book called the Kebber Nagast. I don't have it on me because you can get it in the British Library. I don't have a copy. The Kebber Nagast is a book sacred to the Ethiopian psyche. This book is so important that when General Napier bombed Magdala, the fortress of the great king, the Ethiopian Emperor Theodorus, who was born Kessa Hailu, when they bombed the fortress, General Napier, the English general, who was asked to leave India to come and conduct a military operation against Ethiopia, when he began to seize the treasures of the Abyssinian Empire, he took away the book with him. He took away the book, the Kebber Nagast. Now, I believe it was either Emperor Johannes or Emperor Menelik I writing at the time to the then sovereign of Britain saying, I would kindly request the return of the book above all things. Among the things you stole, the riches and the sumptuous robes and crowns, bring me back this book, for my people will not obey my orders without it. So if anybody knows about the respect, the reverence in which the golden stool of the Ashanti nation is held, think about the Kebber Nagast of the Abyssinian nation in the same way.
I have a question for you.
I haven't even made an argument for a question to come
I've been
to.
listening. So
Yeah.
You're talking about Ethiopia. I have just one
Have I
question.
said enough for you to have a question?
Yes.
Hit me.
So why
Stick a pin.
all African countries were conquered, were all colonized? The only nation that was never colonized until the 1950s when the Italian tried to was Ethiopia. Do you have a logical explanation for that?
No.
Okay. The reason
You're
why...
gonna, no, I can't have I can't have a debate. I can take questions. I can't have, I really am doing a lecture. I am not gonna. I could tell. I really should have told you. I could tell,
Just
no,
discuss
I need to
Ethiopia,
tell.
and
No, I
I'll
haven't
ask you one
started.
question.
Sister, I haven't started. I can take questions later. Well, let me tell you what I'm not about. I'll tell you what I'm not. I'm not about disingenuous lying. If I don't have an answer, I will tell you no. I'm not gonna come here.
gonna share
No,
one with you and then
sister,
go.
I really do need to do this and not get derailed. And I'll talk to you later.
I'm going to take 30 seconds. The reason why Ethiopia was never conquered, because out of all the African nations, Ethiopia already had Christianity.
As I was saying, when you go back into history, so we're going to go back into history now. We talked about the Kebar Nagas, this book. Now in this book describes the relationship between King Solomon and the Queen of Sheba. King Solomon and the Queen of Sheba. Now for those who know the Bible and the Quran, I have to explain the differences in the story. In the Bible, the Queen of Sheba hears about the wisdom of King Solomon and takes a retinue to visit him. That's where the story ends in the Bible. She's so impressed with his wisdom, she returns intellectually and spiritually enriched. But the Ethiopian text, the Kebar Nagas, takes up the story where after leaving Israel, the kingdom of Israel, she is now pregnant. And the book explains how and why. It's about water. Remember my discussion is about the Blue Nile? My discussion is about water. You see, I do not believe the next World War III, well, for a lot of people in Afghanistan and Iraq, there's already been a world war. There's never been a break in the wars. But let's just say, conventionally speaking, there's a new war called World War III. I do not believe the energy source over which it will be fought will be oil. It will be water. If you look at the Kurdish situation, I'm doing a sidebar. I know I'm talking about Ethiopia. I'll meet you back at a point. You see, when people derail me like what happened earlier, I kind of lose my thread. Now, if you look at where the Dijla, Al-Furat, the Tigris, and the Euphrates rivers rise, they rise from eastern Turkey. They flow into Syria and into Iraq. These rivers are almost starting in Kurdish. Turks are going to get upset now because it's inside Turkey, but that area is a kind of a Kurdish area. Now, understand the different ethnic groups that are going to be squabbling over that water. Arabs, Kurds, well, among the Arabs, they have Iraqi Sunnis and Iraqi Shia, and all that, and they have the Syrians, because those rivers flow through there. Now look at the Niles. You have two Niles that meet in the Sudan, the White Nile and the Blue Nile. I shouldn't move. You're asking me to move, I'm doing something. She gotta move, right? The White Nile and she can find a way around it. Ridiculous, right? White Nile and the Blue Nile. The White Nile once thought to start in coming out to debouch from the Lake Victoria in Uganda is now known to start in Rwanda. The actual beginning of the White Nile is much further into the interior of the African continent. Then the other Nile, which debouches from Lake Tana in Ethiopia, is the Blue Nile. As Brother Tariq here would attest, both Niles meet at Omdurman or Khartoum, Omdurman in the Sudan, and they both meet like this, one tumbling out of the highlands of Ethiopia, one coming up through Uganda and the Republic of South Sudan, in what Sudanese call, when they meet at Omdurman like that, where the confluence of the rivers align, is called the longest kiss in geological history, because the two rivers now unite and then joined later on by the Atbara River. They flow straight through Aswan, where they have built the Sidd al-Ali, the Lake Nasser Dam, and flow to the Nile Delta and into the Mediterranean. So Egypt is at the end of the supply chain of the water. So when you look at the situation, both Niles flowing towards Egypt, you think, well, Egypt really has a problem. Because with South Sudan, they have a chance to manage a bit of the river, because in South Sudan, the river breaks into a number of tributaries and smaller rivers before it resumes to become the White Nile flowing to Khartoum. But in a place like Egypt, their fear is that since, and this is a point I neglected to factor in, the larger supply of water from the two Niles comes from the shorter one, the Blue Nile. The Blue Nile may be shorter in length and distance than the White Nile, but it supplies at least 60% of the water that, when they join together, flows to Egypt. So, understandably, Egypt is annoyed about this. But Egypt has historically always had a high-handed attitude towards African countries. Take my late, lamented, beloved hero, Gamal Abdel Nasser, displaying a subtle micro-prejudice that is typical of the time and is still typical today in Egypt. When he spoke about the Sudan and what could he learn from inside Africa, he said, but they should learn from us. There's no point in looking down, i.e. south, forgetting his ancient history, that the origin of the ancient Comitian Egyptians came up from the south, and Diodorus Siculus, the famous historian, said Egypt, meaning the delta, was created from the mud and slime of Ethiopia. In those days, Ethiopia meaning Kush, meaning the black land, meaning that the river flowed from Africa, bringing the silt, that wonderful silt, that mud, that rich sediment. As the waters flow, they erode the rocks, taking all those wonderful nutrients that you try to buy in your Perrier water when they tell you it is filtered through Scotland Mountain or French mountains. It's all those nutrients. The rivers bring those nutrients, and that gave rise to the civilization of Kemet, or ancient Egypt. Now, take Sod al-Ali, the Nasser Dam in Egypt itself, which has displaced so many Nubians and disrupted so many lives. When that lake was constructed, no one had any idea that a lake, by virtue of its very depth, slows down the flow of the water. What happens is that the sediments, those nutrients, the life-giving, fertile nutrients that the waters bring down, settle at the bottom of a deep lake, with the result that the rest of the water that flows onto Egypt is less fertile. So Egypt's delta production actually dropped a little because the water is not carrying all those wonderful good fertile riches. So they had to start supplementing with GM fertilizer and all that thing that's happening in the world today. So let's get back. So Egypt already feels that their water supply is compromised. They believe there's a colonial arrangement they made with Sudan and with Ethiopia, saying that we as Egyptians at the end of the supply chain need to have a decisive say in what happens in the waters of the Nile. And that was agreed upon, but that was a colonial agreement. That agreement needs to be reviewed. So today, when I go to Uganda and I visit the mosque on the hill that Gaddafi built, I see a lot of engineers. And all these engineers are hydrologists. And they're all Egyptian. And they are there as human nilometers. Their role is to monitor how much water Ugandans are using. Can you imagine? In their own country. Their role is to tell Ugandans how, when, and where to switch off the tap and to switch it back on. Now I understand their fears, but they go to Ethiopia. Ethiopia has a different history. The Ethiopians are not Ugandans. Ethiopia says, we are a people who know a lot about water. And we will explain how. Because that's how we came into being. In the Kibber Nagast, the Queen of Sheba Any Ethiopians here, they call her Makeda. Makeda. But the Arabs call her Bilqis. If you know the Quran, the Queen of Sheba is referred to as Bilqis. But the Ethiopians call her Makeda. She is supposed to have come, according to the Muslims, from South Arabia, Sabah. According to the Ethiopians or the Eritreans, call them the Abyssinians. Now when I refer to highland Eritreans and highland Ethiopians, I will call them collectively Abyssinians. Because I'm not talking about Oromo or Kunama or Beria or Bilin. I'm talking about the Semitic-speaking Ethiopians. The ones who speak Tigrinya, Tigray, Amarinya, Gurage, and Harari. That kind I'm talking about. All right. So, according to the history in their book, they say, no, the Queen of Sheba was not an Arab from South Yemen. She was an Abyssinian from a place on the coast called Asab, Sabah. You see the connection. Sheba is the Hebrew way of saying Sabah. Now there's a town in Ethiopia, well I think it's Eritrea if it's on the coast, called Asab, Asaba, Asaba. You see the connection. So there is some, I'm not saying who is correct. I am here to present both sides. The Yemeni will say Bilqis is from South Arabia. The Abyssinians will say she was from Asab, which was under the control of Aksum at the time, which is in the Ethiopian side of the Red Sea. Now, there is history that can satisfy both sides. When you consider that the people called the Shebans or the Sabaeans in history, after the collapse of their Ma'rib Dam, their civilization was a civilization that subsisted on very little rainfall. So they constructed this dam. When the dam collapsed, it's even mentioned in the Quran, the civilization fell into ruins. Many of those people in Yemen returned to the Bedouin, the nomadic style of life. Those who didn't do that emigrated in dribs and drabs into the highlands of Ethiopia. They crossed the Red Sea. This is the reason why the Ge'ez language, now defunct, but liturgical language of the Ethiopian churches, the Orthodox churches, the Abyssinian church, is closely related to Arabic via South Arabian, Sabaean or Sheban, Sabaean. There is a close relationship. Ge'ez is now like Latin. It's no longer spoken, but it's used in the church. And from this language, you get Tigrinya, the closest relative to Ge'ez is Tigrinya. They are all Semitic languages. That's a point that you have to understand. When people want to talk about Arabic being foreign to Africa because it's a Semitic language, there are arguably more Semitic languages in Africa than outside of Africa. If I count the ones in Ethiopia, Harari, Gurage, Amarinya, Tigrinya, Tigray, that's just 5. And then Arabic. So that's 6 Semitic, and I'm sure there's more. If I did my research, there is more. There are more. Whereas outside of the African continent, the Semitic languages are Arabic, Hebrew, the one in Ma'lula, Aramaic, and Syriac. There are 4. And Aramaic and Syriac are spoken in 2 tiny towns in Syria, Ma'lula and some other place I can't remember now. But to get back to the subject, I was trying to show you all where there could be some kind of agreement or convergence between the story of the Queen of Sheba coming from South Arabia and the Queen of Sheba coming from Ethiopia. Let me land first because it sidetracks me. Remember, I'm doing this unscripted. I'm prepared this, and what happens is I lose my thread. I just come at you I'll just finish this. Now, according to the Kabbar Nagast, you all remember I mentioned a book just now called the Kabbar Nagast. It means the glory of kings in the Ge'ez language. Kabbar, Kibru in Arabic, Kibru. Kabbar Nagast, kings like Negusa Nagast, king of Malik al-Muluk, king of kings. Who had this title? Tell me. The last person, Haile Selassie. The last person to have the title, Negusa Nagast. That's cool. That's all. No, we're Pan-Africanists. We got to share each other's information. We can't, it's not enough just to be a Somali or an Igbo man or a Congolese, whatever. You got to be everything now. The world is global. And that's why I said I'm talking about Third World War. But the Third World War is already on. Because when you think about it, the world is so interconnected nowadays, nobody's immune. But I was saying, almost mischievously, the next World War III will be fought over water and not oil. Let me get back to the beginning, why water is so important. So the Queen of Sheba goes to visit, this is in the Barnagas, she goes to visit King Solomon. She says to King Solomon, I will stay in an adjoining boudoir, provided you do not violate the space between us. That's modest language. Y'all know what I'm talking about. That's a man and that's a woman. And they're young and have hot blood. He said, cool, as long as you don't take what is most precious to me from me, I will not take what is most precious to you from you, O Queen of Sheba. She went to bed, but not after being feted and celebrated with the spiciest food ever. You know, all that zigni with all that hot pepper, all that nice thing. Hot pepper. So she wakes up with a raging thirst. The Queen of Sheba awakens thirsty. So now she looks through the adjoining partition and can see this sparkling crystal jug of cool water right next to King Solomon's bed. So she thinks, nah, he dead asleep. My man's snoring. It is the way of kings, you know, when they're alone they snore. So she tiptoes up to his bed, puts the hand on the water. He's still asleep. He's cool. And she drinks. At the moment the water enters her mouth and enters her body, he slaps his hand on her and he says, yeah, you have violated our treaty. You broke the agreement. She said, what? I'm thirsty. He said, we agreed I won't take what's most precious to you if you don't take what's most precious to me. The story is from that, and I don't need to go into the detail, from that, when the Queen of Sheba left to go back to Ethiopia or South Arabia, she was not alone. She was not alone. She carried within her the fruit of King Solomon's loins, who in history became known as Menelik I, which in Arabic Menelik al-Malik, or he was also called Ibn Hakim, son of the wise one. And it is said from this day onwards, they chronicle that monotheism arrived in the form of a kind of Mosaism or Judaism into the highlands of Abyssinia. Now, what do I tell that story for? I'm telling that story to tell you there's an old relationship between Israel and Abyssinia, Ethiopia. And it's about water. Now I have a fear, and I like putting ideas out here that you wouldn't get in the news. I have a fear that given the situation in Israel, where the Sea of Galilee is polluted, the Jordan River is polluted, the Israeli state is highly industrialized, highly mechanized, and needs fresh water. The population is growing. Not all your. Remember in 2006 when they invaded South Lebanon and they got as far as the Litani River? Why did they try to stay at the Litani River? It's like when they annexed the Julan from Syria. The Julan is now a resort with skiing and all kinds of things. It virtually belongs to Israel. You also get meltwater from the snow. Water again. Lebanon 2006, the Litani River, water again. They're running out of water. So now, if I am Benjamin Netanyahu or the other guy, if I am these dudes looking at the situation between Egypt, the former house of bondage, the former home of captivity for Bani Israel, if I'm looking at Egypt today, spoiling for a fight with Ethiopia, with whom I was once in bed, metaphorically and literally, it would be to the advantage of the Zionist state to rekindle a relationship with Abiy Ahmed, of the Prime Minister of Ethiopia. And that relationship will obviously involve the Renaissance Dam. It will involve the waters that are being built that are such a threat to Egypt today. And so we have to look at our geopolitics in this sort of light. What are the implications of our falling out between Sisi and Abiy Ahmed? And Abiy Ahmed is a man for whom I have a lot of respect. However, sidebar, in my opinion, they should not have given him the Nobel Peace Prize so quickly, any more than they should have given Barack Obama the Nobel Peace Prize so quickly. Our beloved Obama, who I love in every other respect except the fact that he was behind NATO's bombing of Libya. The first time an African bombs an African state. Right? I can't get away from it. And Abiy Ahmed, okay, here's what I'm trying to say. I think even children like, what's the little girl's name? The beautiful young against eco warrior Greta Thunberg. And the other one, Malala Yousafzai. I don't think they should be given Nobel Peace Prizes that young. You never know what Hitler resides deep within the recesses of the Russian dolls they play with that will come out later in life. Give Nobel Peace Prizes posthumously, i.e. to people who have already died, who can cause no further trouble. That's a sidebar. Back to Abiy Ahmed. Otherwise, I like him. I think his heart is in the right place. I think he has the right to say, this is who we are. The Ethiopians are a unique people. We are a people who understand. We understand our place in history. And I do believe many other Africans whose histories have been formed differently need to take that example from them. We know the old saying of Edward Gibbon. And you know my saying. I have a proverb. Geography is the mother of history. Ethiopian mountains. Let me try to answer the sister's question now that there can be no argument between us. She asked why Ethiopia had never been a colony of any European power. Edward Gibbon, the historian, observes this, encompassed by enemies on all sides. Ethiopia slept for 1,000 years, forgetful of the world by whom they were forgotten. The mountain fastnesses of Ethiopia saved Ethiopia's bacon many times in history. There are some impenetrable mountains. There are some difficult fastnesses, impregnable. You have mountain tops on which people live that the only access is a rope. There's a rope that you literally have to climb, a rope. I'm talking about elderly women with water vessels on their backs have to negotiate their way up a rope. That is the kind of situation that occurred when Ahmed Gurey was fighting Lebna Dengel, the old jihad crusade thing that was going on in the Horn of Africa. I do remember I did not speak when I did my last this lecture on Islam in East Africa. I didn't devote enough attention to Islam in Ethiopia and the Somalias. And I don't know if I have enough time to do it here. I have resolved to not spend too much time because people's attention spans in this modern age are very short. So I want to just perhaps finish soon talking about my fear of a renewed negative, in my opinion, relationship between the Zionist state of Israel and Ethiopia that can result from the cooling of relations between Egypt and Ethiopia over the Renaissance Dam. I mean, I believe Ethiopia is one of the fastest growing African economies. It will require the kind of technology that Israel, the Zionist state of Israel, will be only too happy to supply in exchange for all that water, which perhaps in a very sardonic way they think is theirs still. I don't think so. I think the Queen of Sheba paid back for the water that she drank. I think the Queen of Sheba paid back plenty for that water that she drank. Solomon's water. Now, I'm even thinking of water meaning now, so let's keep it holy. So I worry about, as I said 2 years ago. I worry about the Zionist state of Israel's interference in eastern Nigeria, Igbo land, telling these people they are Hebrews, telling them they are Hebrew, encouraging them to believe that they are Bani Israel, they are one of the 12 tribes of Israel, in order to get their hands on their fertile agricultural land, their numerous rivers, and most importantly, eastern Nigeria has the concentrated reserves of Nigeria's oil. And I worry about that, just like now I worry about Ethiopia perhaps sidling up to the Zionist state of Israel in order to develop the Renaissance Dam and to develop a military arsenal large enough, if need be, to have a confrontation with Egypt. I hold, unfortunately, you might hear my bias as you hear me discussing. My bias is coming through. I am supposed to be a Muslim, and Egypt is ostensibly Muslim, but my sympathy in this case, even though I am trying to present balance, my sympathies are with Ethiopia. I do believe Ethiopia has the right to self-determination. Nobody has the right to tell Ethiopia what to do with its water, but then Ethiopia also has to exercise a certain amount of fairness in understanding that other countries further along the supply line must have concerns about how much water they stand to lose and how it will affect their agriculture, how to feed their people. Now, I'm not saying that Abiy Ahmed is an angel. Let me not leave this podium saying that this man is a... Remember, there has been some tension in Bahir Dar. They had to put down a small problem in Bahir Dar, in Amhara province. Look where Amhara province. Remember, Abiy Ahmed is being presented as an Oromo. Now, there were some problems in Bahir Dar, in Amhara province, and Abiy Ahmed needs to basically gain popular support inside. The best way to unite the country and become a popular leader is by presenting yourself as a war general. This is what I'm afraid Ismushinu Erdogan, I forget his first name, Erdogan. Huh? Ahmed Rajab Tayyip. This, I'm afraid, and I like to give my opinions here too. I strive for balance, and while I was a firm supporter of Erdogan in the early years, now I am less. I am more and more worried about the direction he is going, and I do believe his attitude in pushing back into Syrian territory is a way of becoming a popular leader once again. I know that there are valid reasons for wanting to do it, not for doing it, for wanting to do it, but I also do believe that he's being a populist leader, and I suspect the same of Abiy Ahmed. I do suspect that Abiy Ahmed is saber-rattling and talking in bombastic terms about the strength of military force he can put on the streets of Addis Ababa in order to show up his prime ministerial credentials. Like I said, this discussion is about water. The world is running out of fresh water. It all ties into the problem of climate change. Ethiopia is lucky in that coming out of its highlands, there's more than one river. There's the Awash River, the Omo River. They have more than one lake. It's not just Lake Tana. It's blessed with abundant supplies of water, and I suspect that foreign forces will try to capitalize on the tensions building right now between Egypt and Ethiopia. I know some Sudanese are standing here and might want to express perhaps their Sudanese concerns, legitimate, because the Renaissance Dam is built very close to the Sudanese border. So there are Sudanese here who would also like to say, well, our relationship with Ethiopia was fraught during the height of the war for the independence of South Sudan. Eritreans tended to side with what is today called Northern Sudan, and Ethiopians tended to side with what is today called the Republic of South Sudan. So there are tensions there, very rooted in modern history. So we have to also factor the Sudanese concerns about the building of the Renaissance Dam into this discussion here. But I think this discussion is the sort of discussion where you stick a pin and say, watch this space. Because, like I said, Africa has wadis. Wadis in Arabic, dry riverbeds. More and more in Africa, we have dry riverbeds. And the countries that have water, like the interlacustrine region, Rwanda, Burundi, Uganda, Eastern Congo, or Ethiopia, regions like these will become the focal point of not just Africa's attention, but the attention of the wider world, like I said, notably and most worryingly for me, the Zionist state of Israel. I think I shall stop here, and if anybody has any questions, I would be more than happy to answer them. Yes, sir.
Just going back to your point about the Queen of Sheba, are you saying that the kingdom was on both sides, was in Yemen and also Ethiopia at the same time, or?
There is that opinion. People have said that only occurred much later in history. First of all, am I actually in this? Am I still here? Yeah. Because what I want to say about this is, first of all, I do not take the Kibber Nagast as factual history, any more than I take the Bible as factual history. The history is a funny thing. History is often written by the conqueror. The person holding the pen is normally a court poet. The scribe doing the chronicling is normally a court poet in the pay of a king. So when you read history, the historian, the person studying historiography, is charged to go and cross-reference what you've read. You do not just say the Kibber Nagast or the Bible says this, and it must be correct because the Bible says so. No, what you have to... So I don't believe everything that's in that story. I'm using it as a term of art to bring you into the importance of water and the relationship between Israel and Ethiopia. Today, the Ethiopians, as you know, believe themselves, the Abyssinians, the Semitic-speaking Abyssinians, believe themselves to be descended from the King Solomon of Israel and Queen Makeda or Bilqis of Saba, Asab, Sheba, and they believe that they have a special place in history. In fact, the Kibber Nagas goes on to say this: Menelik wanted to introduce monotheism to his people. Menelik the first, not Menelik the second, the early one, the son of King Solomon and the Queen of Sheba. He wanted to introduce monotheism to his people. What happened was this: he spoke to a priest, a cleric called Azariah, who was the son of the chief priest of Israel. The chief priest was called Sadak. And he said to him, I want you to send me 10 each, a member of one of the 12 tribes of Israel, to teach my people monotheism. To teach my people Tawheed, Tawahido, as they call it in the language, Tawahido, Tawheed. It's close. What happened is, Azariah was so sad to leave Israel to go into this foreign land that it is said in the Kibber Nagas, he stole the Ark, the Tabot, the Ark of the Covenant, the tablets of which were handed down to Musa alayhi salam with the 10 commandments. He stole them, and the Ethiopians believed, the Abyssinians believed, a mark of their favor of God was that when they were being pursued by Solomon's forces to retrieve the Ark of the Covenant, it is said Solomon's forces were bogged down in the sand, whereas the chariots of Menelik, his son, were buoyed up by the wind and flew to their destination. For this reason, the Ethiopians today believe the Ark of the Covenant is in a monastery in Ethiopia. Some say the monastery of St. Mary, but nobody has set eyes on it since that time. Because of this, like I was saying, the Ethiopians consider themselves to have a unique place, not just in African history, but in biblical history. And that is why I say anyone wishing to encourage them into a relationship, which to me is against Pan-Africanism, it will be the Zionist state of Israel. If anybody can do it, because of that history they have, believing that their fathers originally were from the Solomon lineage. Now, I do believe they are Semites in terms of language. They speak a Semitic language. In that respect, they are Semites. You can't pretend that they are not. But it could be, and I hold with this opinion, that their Semitic language comes from the side of their ancestry that came from South Arabia after the collapse of the Ma'rib Dam and moved into the highlands of Ethiopia. Physically looking at them, if you see how short, if you see how not very tall Ethiopians, look at Haile Selassie. You see how they are not very tall. Look at the Yemeni. Look at the Yemeni. They're not very tall. This, if you look the other side of their ancestry of the Ethiopian, they look like Somali. But Somali are very tall. So you see where their shortness comes from. They do have South Arabian or Yemeni or Yemenite blood or Sabaean blood on one. So there is that. But they're Africans, and I do believe as a Pan-Africanist, I want them to work with us and not with the Zionist state of Israel. I suspect that the attitude of a person like Sisi will only inflame the situation, because I lived in Egypt for 1 year and never one day passed of going to the street except they call me Abd. Ya Abd. Ya Sudani. Ya Zol. No, they know Ya Zol, but when they say Ya Zol, it's to take the mic.
Yes.
They're taking the mic.
Yes.
Not about what. And usually, I test them. I wear jalabiya, Sudani jalabiya. And you get it. Now if I come out and looking, because I used to teach formally, I don't get it that much. If I'm walking with African students from the University of Alexandria, we get teased. We get taunted. So I know there's a kind of high-handed attitude in Egypt towards black people, towards Nubians in Aswan. They call it Intabawab. You're the doorkeeper. Just keep doors. Intabawab. I know. I understand. So my sympathies are with the Prime Minister of Ethiopia. However, the Quran also tells me this. The Quran says, do not let your, I don't want to use hatred, your animosity for somebody to be a cause of injustice to them. So when you're doing a discussion like this, I cannot stand here and say, oh, I don't like Egyptians and I don't like Sisi, so they're wrong. I did not say I don't like Egyptians. I just said I don't like being called a nigger in Egypt. I don't like that. Egyptians are cool. I like kushari. Nobody likes kushari more than I like fatir. اللي فيها فواكه, اللي فيها عسل. I like it. Yeah. Egypt is a nice place. Egyptians like to laugh. They're funny. They can't stop talking. So what I'm saying here, the Quran tells me, having said what I've said, the Quran tells me, do not let my personal feelings be a source of injustice to someone else. Likewise, I want to leave you all with this message. Do not let your love for people blind you to the bad that they do. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh. I'll take a question.
You mentioned Erdogan earlier on and compared
Recep
him with
Tayyip Erdogan.
and
To the Prime Minister of Ethiopia.
And I don't think me personally, you sound really knowledgeable about everything so far, yeah? But as far as, hang on, but there's always space for disagreement on that particular subject.
And this is the time for it. Yeah. Go on.
On Erdogan and comparing him with the Ethiopian
Prime Minister.
Prime Minister leader, I didn't feel it was fair to make that comparison for what reason I'm going to explain now. Because he's been dealing with a very complex situation that's surrounding him, yeah, for a very long period of time. And you know, we can do 1,001 things right and maybe get one thing wrong and everybody remembers the one thing.
That's true. I feel that I agree with you. I feel the same
I
about.
don't think his intention was initially
Yeah,
to
I agree
be
with
a
you.
popularity. He's in a very difficult spot.
Yeah,
He can't
yeah.
please all the people all
Exactly,
the time.
exactly.
And he's.
I agree with
and
you.
And it's a Titanic there that's hit a rock and is keeping that ship afloat.
You
It
reminded
affects the
me,
whole
you know
world.
what you reminded me of? Gaddafi. Gaddafi did a lot of good. He did a lot of foolishness too, but people only focus on the foolishness. You reminded me of that, and thank you very much for that. Now, see that this to me is the place for disagreement. I was content. I was about to take questions. If you want to take away, if you want to take your football and go home, it's cool. Anybody have anything they'd like to add? The discussion I've had today is not the sort of discussion that would invite controversy, because it's a discussion we're having like a prognosis. We're looking down the Nile to see what can happen. We're looking across the Red Sea to see what might happen. We know how important water is to the world today, more than any other time in history. And I do believe that we need to nip this problem in the bud. And people of the African continent, it is an African problem, and we need Africans together. Sudan, your country, should be one of them, of course. Uganda should be one of them, of course. Those should get around the table to discuss how the waters of the Nile would be distributed after the construction of the Renaissance Dam. And that's where I put my cards on the table. I believe the dam should be constructed. I believe Ethiopia has the right to their dam, but I believe Ethiopia needs to be very environmentally aware of what happens when you build a dam. Not only do you displace large numbers of human beings, there's a threat to wildlife, flora and fauna. There's a threat to the surrounding ecology when you construct a dam. There's the possibility of, if the dam bursts, like happened in ancient Yemen, what will happen to the entire country? You could have something in the form of a tsunami. In fact, when discussing the flood in the Quran and the Bible, anthropologists are of two opinions. Two opinions. One, the flood that they're describing was the rise of the earth's waters at the end of the last ice age. Of course, when the temperature rises and the ice melts, what will happen to the sea level? It will rise. Others say the flood, as mentioned in the scriptures, Quran and Bible, were more local. With the collapse of the Ma'rib Dam in South Arabia, which is Yemen today, the water pouring everywhere was apocalyptic and gave the impression of a universal flood. If you understand something about humans in that time, when no mobile phones existed, you hardly knew the people who lived in the valley over the hill. So for these people, the world was their village, the world was their valley. Does anyone else have anything else they want to say on the subject of water in Africa? We could talk a lot about the water under the Sahara. I am aware I was supposed to talk a little bit about Islam in Ethiopia, and I think it's a bit incongruous to bring up the subject of the jihads and the crusades, for such they were, between the Ethiopian kingdom and the Muslim principalities coming in from Sela, moving in, trading with the Muslim Emirate of Shoa inside Ethiopia, which gave rise to a lot of wars, and the destabilization that erupted therefrom caused the vacuum into which the Oromo people had pushed, creating the vast numbers of Oromo around the foothills of the Ethiopian Massif today. But that's a subject for another day. It's like a teaser you give people after the film has ended, like a little trailer for the next upcoming thing. I think if nobody has any more questions, I think I will leave the subject of Solomon and Sheba here. Thank you all for your kind attention. And once more, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh.
Come take over everything from your melanin. Man, say it straight. Man, don't listen to BBC. Man, don't listen to ITV.
There used to be 500,000 seats in movies in Afghanistan. Where are they?
Don't listen to BBC.
Who's doing the persecution? Who's doing the... So my point's really simple. That's probably true. So I do put myself in the first place. There's 1 million Jewish refugees from the Muslim world. And I know why he came here, I just told you. Okay, so you're saying that the Muslims here are fleeing persecution from Muslims, from other Muslims. And that's my point. You would imagine if a religion was close